Good morning, everybody. Welcome to AP European History. My name is Mr. Wolshuck, and I'm going to be your instructor for this long and wild ride through the history of Europe. Today, we're going to deal with the origins of humanity, where human beings came from, how they lived and what their lifestyle was like in prehistory, and how they eventually transitioned into civilization. The first thing we have to understand then is, where do human beings come from and how long have we been around? So the prevailing theory of archaeologists right now is that human beings have been around for somewhere around 100,000 years. Now, very recently, there's been some new evidence that suggests that it might be up to double that, 250,000 years. There's some evidence which is not universally accepted yet, but is starting to gain some traction that suggests that Homo sapiens, our species, has been around for about 250,000 years. But that's generally the kind of time frame that you see. There are some theories that suggest human beings have been around for as much as 1,000,000 years. We're going to stick with the most widely accepted number, which is basically 100,000 years. BCE is the origin of humanity, and of course, human beings originated in an area of the world which is called the Great Rift Valley, which is out here in Eastern Africa. The Great Rift Valley is actually an area where two tectonic plates are spreading from each other, hence the rift, and that is where we've discovered the earliest evidence of not only human beings, Homo sapiens, but also other early hominids are in that Great Rift Valley region. The first major event for Homo sapiens that we can document and have evidence for occurred about 70,000 years ago. Homo sapiens started to migrate out of the Great Rift Valley, and they started to relocate north. From the Great Rift Valley, they moved north across what is today the Sahara Desert. Now, one of the important things is people get this idea in their head of, how is it possible that these very primitive human beings could have made it across that gigantic desert? To understand that, we have to understand a little bit about climatology and the fact that the climate changes relatively frequently. In northern Africa, in that Sahara region, what we see is about a 23,000 year cycle between wet cycles and dry cycles, and it takes about 23,000 years to complete that entire cycle. From dry to wet and back takes about 23,000 years. If you do the math and you run back far enough, about 70,000 years ago, we notice that the Sahara Desert region of Africa would have been in its wet cycle, which means it would not have been an extremely harsh and dry desert. It would have been a tropical rainforest with lots of water and lots of cover, and very relatively easy for these early people to migrate. And so one of the interesting things we've developed in the past 100 years is DNA technology. And because we can test people's DNA from all over the world, one of the things that we know is all living human beings on Earth today originated from the same tribe of people migrating out of Africa approximately 70,000 years ago, north to the Mediterranean, at which point they split into two different groups. One went west towards the Atlantic, the other then crossed the Sinai Peninsula and made their way into Asia, eventually branching off into a group that went to Europe and India and China. And so, of course, this is the currently accepted model of not only the origin, but also the spread of Homo sapiens sapiens. From 40,000 years ago, all the way back to 10,000 years BCE, what we do is we refer to that particular time period as the Paleolithic Era. Paleo means old, and lithic means stone, and so this is what we refer to as the Stone Age. And the reason we do that is people who lived at this time were using tools, and the tools they were using were generally made out of stone, hence the name Old Stone Age. Now, eventually, by about the year 10,000 BCE, we see that human existence fundamentally changes. And the reason that it fundamentally changes is the coming of what we call the Neolithic Revolution. During the Neolithic Revolution, life for human beings on Earth changes in one of the greatest ways in all of our existence. In multiple sites around the world, from Africa to the Middle East to Europe, Asia, North, Central, South America, what we see is people transitioned from being hunters and gatherers, which kept their populations very small. It also kept their populations very mobile. They started to harvest grains and animals and to domesticate them so that they took control of the life cycles of not only the animals but also the plants. This Neolithic Revolution meant that life for human beings was going to fundamentally change. First of all, it was going to generate a food surplus, which means populations could start to grow. Secondly, it helped to normalize food production, which means rather than having an often swinging feast and famine cycle where a bad year could create a famine so bad that the entire tribe would be wiped out, with the coming of agriculture, not only was there a surplus, but it also helped to smooth that curve and to produce increasing grain yields. Also, what it did was it settled people down and kept them in one place. When you plant your crops, you can't just walk away from them, and so people became relatively stationary, and people started to conglomerate together into small villages, eventually small towns, eventually large towns, and eventually what we see is this Neolithic Revolution is going to produce the rise of civilization. Now, the rise of civilization is going to be our next video, so I hope this was good for you. I hope you learned something about the origins of humanity and the beginning part of the transition into civilization. If you liked it, leave a like, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and we're going to keep rolling through AP European history. See you in the next video.